The tragic story of Shoko Asahara and his doomsday cult, Aum Shinrikyo, begins in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Tokyo in 1984. In the heart of Tokyo, a small yoga class led by a partially blind man named Chizuo Matsumoto grew into one of the most dangerous cults in modern history. What started as a peaceful meditation group turned into a doomsday cult that shocked the world with its violent acts. Asahara, once a failed politician and acupuncturist, became a bearded guru who claimed he could save his followers from the end of the world. He mixed ideas from Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity to create a dangerous belief system. Over time, Aum Shinrikyo went from teaching yoga to making deadly weapons and plotting terrorist attacks. Their actions brought tragedy, leaving many dead and thousands injured. The cult's darkest moment came in 1995 with a nerve gas attack on Tokyo's subway, an event that changed Japan forever. Asahara's early life. The birth of the Dark Messiah. Shoko Asahara was born Chizuo Matsumoto on March 2, 1955 in Kumamoto Prefecture, Japan. He was one of 4 children in a poor family of tatami mat makers. Matsumoto was born partially blind and lost all sight in his left eye at a young age. He was sent to a school for the blind at age 6 and never lived with his family again. As a child, Matsumoto discovered he could earn money and popularity by guiding other students at the school to a local candy shop. But he also developed a reputation as a bully, beating up and extorting money from other students. During his teenage years, Matsumoto had grandiose fantasies of one day ruling Japan as a robot king. After graduating in 1973, Matsumoto's application to study at Tokyo University was rejected. He instead studied acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine, later opening a small pharmacy in Chiba Prefecture selling unregulated health drinks. In 1981, Matsumoto was fined for practicing medicine without a license. Around this time, Matsumoto became interested in religion and spirituality. Recently married with children to support, he studied a variety of new religious movements and esoteric practices in his spare time, from Christianity and Hinduism to yoga and Buddhism. He soon adopted the name Shoko Asahara, started wearing white robes, and began promoting himself as a spiritual guru. Founding Aum Shinrikyo. In 1984, Asahara started a meditation group called Aum Shinsen no Kai, later renamed Aum Shinrikyo, Religion of Supreme Truth. Operating out of a one-bedroom apartment in Tokyo, the group initially focused on yoga, meditation, and Asahara's unique interpretations of Buddhism. Asahara claimed to have achieved enlightenment during a trip to India in 1986. He said he had been given a mission to lead the armies of the gods, and that Aum members would survive the coming apocalypse, which he predicted would occur in 1997 or 2000. Borrowing from the Book of Revelation, Asahara identified the United States as the Beast and said it would attack Japan, instigating World War III. While Asahara's apocalyptic predictions might have seemed far-fetched to outsiders, they were just the beginning of a descent into darkness that would soon engulf not only his followers, but all of Japan. In the early days, Aum Shinrikyo managed to fly under the radar in Japan, not yet linked to any major crimes. But behind the scenes, Asahara was becoming increasingly fixated on apocalyptic biblical prophecies, convinced that doomsday was near. To spread his doomsday message, Aum launched a savvy media campaign. The cult published its own manga, comics, and anime, weaving its radical religious ideas into popular themes like space exploration, futuristic weapons, global conspiracies, and the search for hidden truths. Aum's magazine, like Vajrayana Saka and Enjoy Happiness, took on a missionary tone, aiming to impress educated Japanese who found traditional religious sermons dull. Aum even amassed a sizable following in Russia. Asahara was particularly taken with Isaac Asimov's Foundation sci-fi novels, which told of an enlightened group of scientists forced underground during a dark age, patiently waiting for the right moment to emerge and rebuild society. Asahara saw Aum as playing a similar messianic role. Deceptive recruitment tactics. Aum Shinrikyo's recruitment efforts. The Aum Salvation Plan made exciting promises to potential members. They claimed joining would heal sicknesses, help people reach their full potential, and achieve their goals through ancient teachings and meditation. These promises were alluring, attracting people from all walks of life, including government workers, military members, and police. However, a more sinister reality was hiding beneath the surface. Aum faced accusations of lying to and manipulating recruits, forcing members to stay against their will, and making followers give them money. There were even rumors Aum had killed a member who tried to leave in 1989. Becoming a member allegedly involved taking hallucinogenic drugs like LSD. The group's supposed religious practices often served as a cover for abuse, with scared recruits being hung upside down or given electric shocks under the guise of yoga. Aum's hospitals were reportedly a scheme to extort money, with the cult making patients pay enormous bills. By the end of the 1980s, Aum Shinrikyo was mired in serious controversy, with allegations of deception, confinement, robbery, and murder surrounding the group. But this was only the beginning of Asahara's dark journey into mass violence. Sakamoto family murder. Aum Shinrikyo committed its first known murder in 1989. Tsutsumi Sakamoto, a lawyer working on a class action lawsuit against the cult, mysteriously disappeared along with his wife and infant son. Sakamoto had taped an interview with Tokyo Broadcasting System Television (TBS) about his efforts to expose Aum's crimes. But in a shocking betrayal, TBS secretly showed the interview tape to Aum members, violating Sakamoto's confidentiality. Aum leaders then pressured the network to cancel the broadcast. Days later, on November 3, 1989, several top Aum members, including the cult's chief scientist and a martial arts master, drove to Sakamoto's home in Yokohama. Armed with deadly potassium chloride and syringes, they planned to kidnap Sakamoto. But he unexpectedly stayed home that day with his family. In the early hours of November 5th, the Aum hit squad crept into Sakamoto's apartment through an unlocked door. 33-year-old Tsutsumi was killed with a hammer, injected with the poison, and strangled. His wife Satoko, 29, was also beaten and injected. Even their 14-month-old baby Tatsuhiko was injected with potassium chloride and suffocated. The cult killers hid the family's bodies in metal drums scattered across remote rural areas, and mutilated the corpses to prevent identification. The Sakamotos were not found until years later, reduced to bones. TBS kept the damning interview secret until 1996, leading to accusations they had contributed to the Sakamoto family's murder by tipping off the cult. Aum's escalating violence. In the early 1990s, Aum Shinrikyo's activities took an even darker turn. The cult began plotting to assassinate critics and opponents, including leaders of rival religious groups. In 1993, they even attempted to kill a cartoonist who had mocked Aum in his satirical work. Aum's tactics grew more sophisticated. In 1991, the cult stole phone company uniforms and equipment to wiretap people illegally. They then wrote a manual on wiretapping, nerve gas, and assassinations. In July 1993, Aum carried out a failed bioterror attack in Tokyo. Cult members sprayed liquid containing anthrax spores from their headquarters rooftop, trying to cause an epidemic. Many complained of foul odors, but luckily no one got sick. The next year, in June 1994, the cult committed its next major attack. Aum released deadly sarin nerve gas in a neighborhood in the city of Matsumoto. They were targeting judges involved in a lawsuit against the cult. The sarin attack killed 8 people and hospitalized many more. Later that year, Aum began secretly scaling up their manufacturing of chemical weapons like sarin and VX nerve gas. They tested sarin on sheep at a remote Australian farm, killing 29. Over the next 2 years, the cult used these deadly substances to assassinate several people. Aum's sinister plans. The cult also tried to steal classified documents on military hardware like tanks and artillery from a Mitsubishi factory in late 1994. In December 1994 and January 1995, Aum used VX in attacks on 3 individuals. One victim, suspected by Asahara of being a spy, was sprayed with VX and died after 10 days in a coma. Another target, a vocal critic of the cult, was assassinated the same way. In February 1995, Aum abducted and murdered a 69-year-old man, the brother of a cult member who had escaped. They killed him at an Aum compound, burned his body in a special microwave incinerator, and dumped his remains in a lake. The man had received death threats demanding to know where his sister was. As police prepared for nationwide raids on Aum in March 1995, the increasingly paranoid Asahara allegedly ordered the Tokyo subway attack to divert attention. The cult was also trying to mass-produce AK-47 rifles in preparation for a showdown with authorities. Police found rifle parts and plans in an Aum vehicle that April. These incidents show how Aum Shinrikyo evolved from a fringe religious group into an increasingly violent criminal organization willing to commit murder, terrorism, and mass destruction under Shoko Asahara's twisted ideology and cult leadership. And with each passing month, Aum's attacks grew bolder and more deadly. But even these heinous acts would pale in comparison to the horror that was about to unfold in the heart of Tokyo. Hell on the Metro. On the morning of March 20th, 1995, 5 Aum members boarded crowded subway trains in Tokyo during rush hour, carrying bags of sarin. They punctured the bags with umbrellas, releasing toxic fumes into the packed cars before escaping. The coordinated attack struck 5 trains on 3 subway lines that converged at the Kasumigaseki station, near the Japanese parliament and many government ministries. Commuters suddenly found themselves struggling to breathe, blinded by agonizing eye pain. Sarin, originally developed as a pesticide, is a nerve agent 26 times deadlier than cyanide. Exposure causes a brutal cascade of symptoms within seconds, starting with a runny nose and tightness in the chest and escalating to nausea, vomiting, seizures, respiratory shutdown, and death. Panicked riders poured out of stations, gasping for air and collapsing on the street. Passers-by stopped to help, not realizing they too were being poisoned by the colorless, odorless gas coming off victims' clothing. Hospitals were overwhelmed with thousands suffering from sarin exposure. In total, 13 people died and over 6,000 were injured, some permanently. It remains the worst terrorist attack in Japanese history. Arrests and raids. The subway attack was a wake-up call for Japanese authorities, who had been reluctant to crack down on Aum despite years of suspected crimes. Police launched raids on Aum compounds across Japan, uncovering stunning evidence of the cult's militarization. At Aum's headquarters at the foot of Mount Fuji, police found tons of chemicals for producing sarin, a military helicopter, cells holding prisoners, and biological warfare agents like anthrax and Ebola. They seized millions in cash and gold, as well as wiretapping equipment and an electric chair used to punish disobedient followers. Over 150 Aum members were arrested in the following months. Asahara had gone into hiding, but was found on May 16, 1995, in a tiny crawlspace in an Aum building, where he had been concealed in complete darkness for weeks. He was arrested and charged with masterminding the subway attack and numerous other crimes. Dozens of Aum's top members were also arrested and put on trial. Trials and executions. Asahara's trial for the subway attack and other charges began in 1996, but would drag on for over 7 years, becoming Japan's longest and most expensive trial ever. Asahara never confessed or apologized, maintaining a vow of silence throughout the proceedings. In court, he would slip into incoherent ramblings, make confusing statements, and often sit silently. Some of Asahara's followers testified against him, providing details of his orders to commit murder and terrorism. In 2004, Asahara was found guilty of masterminding the sarin attack and other crimes and sentenced to death. His multiple appeals were rejected, and the sentence was finalized in 2006. On July 6, 2018, Asahara was executed by hanging at age 63, along with 6 other senior Aum members. Another 6 cult members were hanged later that month. Announcing the executions, Japan's justice minister said the crimes plunged people, not only in Japan but in other countries as well, into deadly fear and shook society to its core. Aftermath and legacy. In the years after Asahara's arrest, Aum Shinrikyo went bankrupt and was stripped of its religious status. The group split into 2 factions, Aleph and Hikari no Wa, which claimed to have renounced violence and Asahara's teachings. However, Japanese authorities continued to monitor both groups, believing they still pose a danger. The Aum Shinrikyo attacks deeply scarred the Japanese psyche and shattered the nation's sense of safety. The cult's militarization and turn to terrorism went undetected for years, exposing failures in law enforcement and intelligence. For many, it was a disturbing reminder that apocalyptic cults and homegrown extremism could emerge even in a country known for its low crime and social order. Asahara, once a charismatic guru with thousands of devoted followers, is now despised in Japan as a mass murderer and terrorist mastermind. His legacy is one of destruction, fear, and trauma inflicted on innocent people in the name of a doomsday cult. The story of Aum Shinrikyo remains a chilling reminder of how a small group, led by a persuasive, charismatic leader with an apocalyptic vision, can unleash shocking acts of violence on an unsuspecting society. Germany's deadliest killer nurse. Our tragic story begins with a man entrusted to care for the sick and vulnerable. But behind the calm exterior of a nurse beat the heart of a monster. This is the chilling tale of Niels Hergel, who took the lives of over 85 patients, making him the most prolific serial killer in modern German history. His heinous crimes have shocked the nation and left countless families devastated. Niels Hergel's journey from ordinary citizen to notorious killer began in the coastal town of Wilhelmshaven, Germany. Born on December 30th, 1976, Hergel grew up in what he described as a sheltered childhood, far removed from the horrors he would later inflict. His family had deep roots in healthcare, with both his father and grandmother working as nurses. This family legacy would shape Hergel's career path, though no one could have foreseen the dark turn it would take. As a young man, Hergel appeared to be following a respectable trajectory. He completed his nursing education with dedication, seemingly embracing the noble calling of caring for the sick and vulnerable. In 1999, he took his first job at the St. Willihad Hospital in his hometown of Wilhelmshaven. Colleagues remembered him as confident and committed to his patients, qualities that should have made him an asset to any medical team. But beneath the surface of this promising young nurse, a disturbing psychology was taking root. Experts would later identify a severe narcissistic disorder in Hergel, a condition that would fuel his insatiable need for attention and admiration. This psychological flaw, combined with the power and access afforded by his position, would prove to be a deadly combination. The killings begin. In 1999, Niels Hergel took a position at the Oldenburg Clinic, working in the intensive care unit specializing in cardiac surgery. In August 2001, the hospital staff, including Hergel, convened to address a concerning rise in both patient resuscitations and fatalities over the previous months. Investigations revealed that 58% of these events took place during Hergel's shifts. Following the meeting, Hergel took a 3-week sick leave. Remarkably, during his absence, only 2 patients in Ward 211 passed away, a notable decrease compared to the period before his leave. Years later, after his arrest, Hergel confessed that he thought he had been discovered at the time of the meeting which prompted his leave. Notwithstanding these disturbing indicators, Hergel was not investigated directly. Instead, Pressured by the head physician of Ward 211, Hergel was simply reassigned to the anesthesiology department in 2001. The head physician of the anesthesiology ward quickly grew wary of Hergel's recurring presence during emergency situations. In September 2002, the chief physician of the Oldenburg Clinic confronted Hergel after several patients under his care were found in critical condition for apparently inexplicable reasons. Hergel was given the choice to either resign from the clinic while continuing to receive his full salary for 3 months or transfer to the clinic's logistics division, where he would be responsible for transporting patients within the hospital. Astonishingly, rather than alerting the authorities about Hergel, the Oldenburg Clinic permitted him to discreetly resign. On October 10, 2002, Hergel obtained a glowing letter of recommendation from the clinic's nursing director. The letter concluded by affirming that Hergel had executed his duties to the highest level of satisfaction. Equipped with this outstanding endorsement, Hergel transitioned to the Delmenhorst Clinic in December 2002, harboring his deadly secret. The change in environment did nothing to deter his murderous compulsions. In fact, the new surroundings appeared to further embolden him. At Delmenhorst, the trend persisted, a wave of suspicious fatalities coinciding with Hergel's shifts. Deadly game in the ICU. This move placed him in a high-stakes environment where life and death hung in the balance daily. For most healthcare professionals, such a setting inspires a deep sense of responsibility and care. For Hergel, it became a stage for his twisted desires. With calculated precision, he deliberately induced cardiac arrests in patients by administering overdoses of heart medication. This gave him the opportunity to play the role of savior, attempting to resuscitate the very patients he had endangered. As Hergel's confidence grew, so did the frequency and boldness of his actions. Patients who were already vulnerable became unwitting pawns in his deadly game. He exploited the chaos and urgency of emergency situations to carry out his sinister acts. The true extent of Hergel's crimes during this period would not be known for years. Hospital records would later reveal a disturbing spike in deaths and resuscitations during Hergel's shifts, a red flag that went unnoticed or ignored by hospital administration. This failure of oversight would have devastating consequences, allowing Hergel's killing spree to continue unchecked for several years, leaving a trail of grieving families and unanswered questions in his wake. A killer unmasked. Hergel's deadly rampage finally came to an end on June 22, 2005, when a fellow nurse caught him in the act of unnecessarily administering Ajmaline medication to a patient in Delmenhorst. The patient survived and Hergel was arrested, then later sentenced to 7.5 years in prison for attempted murder. But this was only the beginning of the revelations. During the course of his 2015 trial, Hergel admitted to his psychiatrist that he had killed up to 30 patients. Shocked investigators launched a special commission, codenamed Cardio, to determine the true scope of his crimes. The commission exhumed and examined 134 bodies from 67 cemeteries and analyzed hundreds of medical records. It was a painstaking process, complicated by the fact that many potential victims had already been cremated. The investigation found evidence of an additional 16 murders and 10 attempted murders at the Oldenburg Clinic between 1999 to 2020. Scope of the evil crimes. As more details emerged, the scale of Hergel's killing spree began to strain belief. Investigators uncovered at least 36 suspicious deaths at the Oldenburg Clinic and 64 more at Delmenhorst between 2000 to 2005, though they believe the actual number is likely much higher. If convicted, it would make Hergel the deadliest serial killer in Germany's post-war history. The victims were men and women, ranging in age from 34 to 96. Hergel's methods were coldly efficient. He would inject patients with cardiovascular medications like Ajmaline, Sotalol, lidocaine, amiodarone, and calcium chloride, bringing on cardiac arrest. He would then try to resuscitate them in order to impress colleagues with his life-saving skills. Tragically, In many cases, they could not be revived. Herjel claims that the decisions to commit these crimes were relatively spontaneous, and his motivations were a mix of boredom and a desire to show off his resuscitation abilities. Prosecutors paint a picture of an egomaniac who, in all cases at least, accepted the death of the patients as a result of the effect of the drugs. Aftermath and anger. As the horrors unfolded, the German public was left stunned and outraged. How could such a monster operate unchecked for so long within the healthcare system? Investigations revealed the catastrophic failures by hospital staff and administrators. Records showed that deaths and resuscitations soared on Herjel's watch, in some cases more than doubling. A law firm's investigation concluded that leading doctors at the Oldenburg Clinic had been aware of the mounting death toll, but either gave no thought to the cause or played down suspicions. Remarkably, as mentioned earlier, rather than report Herjel to police, the Oldenburg Clinic allowed him to transfer to Delmenhorst with a letter of recommendation. Several Delmenhorst staff noticed his suspicious behavior, with one even reporting him to her superiors. But still nothing was done. Even after the 2005 incident that led to his arrest, Herjel was allowed to continue working for 2 more days, during which he killed yet another patient. A trial and a warning. In a packed courtroom on June 6, 2019, Niels Herjel was sentenced to life in prison for 85 counts of murder, the maximum penalty under German law. Delivering the verdict, Judge Sebastian Buermann struggled to put the enormity of the crimes into words. "Your guilt is unimaginable," he told Herjel. The human mind struggles to take in the sheer scale of these crimes. A trial spanning from October 2018 to June 2019, Niels Herjel faced an unprecedented 100 murder charges for deaths that occurred between February 2000 and June 2005. The 85 victims were aged between 34 and 96 years old. Due to the high number of people involved, including 120 joint plaintiffs, the proceedings were held in the spacious Wesser Ems Hallen ballrooms. On the first day of the trial, Herjel confessed to 43 of the murders, could not recall 52, and denied involvement in the remaining 5. Over the course of 24 days, the court heard testimony from 32 witnesses, 8 of whom testified under oath. Medical experts provided detailed information on the patient's conditions and the effects of the drugs administered by Herjel. A forensic psychologist examined the truthfulness of Herjel's testimony and found no indications of a false confession. In their closing arguments, prosecutors sought convictions on 97 counts and acquittals on 3. The defense argued that the evidence was insufficient in many cases, seeking acquittals on 31 counts, murder convictions on 55, and attempted murder convictions on 14. On June 6, 2019, the Oldenburg court sentenced Herjel to life in prison for 85 counts of murder, with the remaining 15 resulting in not guilty verdicts. The court decided that Herjel's crimes were extremely serious. Because of this, he got the harshest punishment possible under German law, a life sentence with no chance of parole after 15 years. The court said Herjel's reason for killing to look like a hero when he saved patients was a base motive, which is one of the things that has to be true for a murder conviction in Germany. Both Herjel and a joint plaintiff appealed the verdict, but the Federal Court of Justice dismissed these appeals on September 11, 2020, finalizing the judgment. A further trial against 4 employees of the Delmenhorst Clinic, where Herjel had worked, was postponed until after the nurse's verdict was final, as he had the right to refuse testimony until then. The trial garnered significant public interest, with attendance increasing as the proceedings progressed. The court provided 80 seats for media representatives and 118 for the general public, with attendance peaking at around 190 spectators and 25 media members. Addressing the court for the last time, Herjel turned to the gallery where families of his victims sat. "I would like to sincerely apologize for everything I did to you over the course of years," he said. But for many, his remorse rang hollow. He only acted out his remorse to gather plus points, said Gaby Lubin, a lawyer representing victims' families. He should have stayed silent. While the conviction brings legal closure, the scars left by Hergel's crimes will linger in Germany for generations. His deadly spree has forced a national reckoning about how someone charged with protecting society's most vulnerable could instead become their killer. It has exposed frightening gaps in oversight, communication, and accountability across German healthcare. And it has shattered the trust that citizens place in those who take an oath to, first, do no harm. As Germany grapples with these uncomfortable questions, the victims of Niels Hergel must not be forgotten. Behind the staggering numbers are real people, mothers, fathers, grandparents who placed their lives in the hands of a caregiver, never imagining the nightmare that would follow. While nothing can bring back those lost, the Hergel case has sounded an urgent alarm, and it is a call to honor the memory of the victims by ensuring such unconscionable violations of trust can never happen again. Church of the Firstborn Murders. What would make a mother kill her own children? How can someone go from being a normal parent to a murderer? These are the questions at the heart of the Lori Vallow case. It's a tangled web of fringe religious beliefs, suspicious deaths, and the horrific murders of two innocent children, 16-year-old Tylee Ryan and 7-year-old Joshua J.J. Vallow. As the details emerged, the world watched in disbelief. This is the tragic timeline of how extreme views and a thirst for power led to unspeakable evil. Lori and Chad's descent into a delusional doomsday cult would ultimately destroy multiple families and end with both of them sentenced to life in prison for their wicked crimes. Lori's troubled past. Lori Norn Cox was born into a devout Mormon family from California in 1973. Her early adulthood were marked by a series of failed relationships and marriages. She first wed her high school sweetheart in 1992, but the union quickly crumbled. Undeterred, Lori tried again in 1995 with another partner. Together, they had a son named Colby. However, this marriage also ended in divorce just 3 years later. Desperate for love and stability, Lori married her third husband, Joseph Ryan, in 2001. Joseph adopted Colby, and the couple welcomed a daughter, Tylee, in 2002. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Lori and Joseph's marriage was plagued by conflict, and a bitter custody battle ensued when the pair inevitably divorced in 2005. During this tumultuous time, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, allegedly attacked Joseph Ryan, claiming that he had been abusive towards Lori and the children. Years later, in 2020, a shocking revelation emerged when Colby disclosed in an interview that Joseph Ryan had sexually abused him as a child. With 3 failed marriages in her rear view and seeking a fresh start, Lori married Charles Vallow in 2006 at the age of 33. In 2013, they expanded their family by adopting Charles' grandnephew, Joshua J.J., who had autism. But little did anyone know that this seemingly happy family was about to be shattered by a web of deceit and deadly obsession. Chad's journey into the darkness. Born in Utah in 1968, Chad Daybell was also raised in a Mormon household. He married Tamara Tammy Douglas in 1990, and together they had 5 children. Chad worked various jobs, including as a gravedigger and cemetery caretaker, but his true passion lay in writing novels about religion and the end times. In 2004, Chad and Tammy founded Spring Creek Book, a small publishing company that printed Chad's own works and those of other authors with unconventional beliefs about the apocalypse. As Chad's business flourished, he gained a following among extreme Mormon groups, becoming a sought-after writer and speaker. His novels often depicted dystopian futures and featured characters based on his own family. Chad frequently wrote about a supernatural voice that guided him and his characters, offering advice and instructions. Chad claimed to have had 2 near-death experiences that granted him access to otherworldly visions. He believed that these visions were genuine glimpses into future events. Chad also contributed to a paid Mormon forum called Another Voice of Warning, Avow, where he shared his near-death experiences and his predictions about the future. As time went on, Chad's religious beliefs grew increasingly radical. He became fixated on his visions and the events he believed would transpire during the end times. This dark and apocalyptic obsession consumed Chad, ultimately leading him down a sinister path that would intertwine with Laurie's troubled life in a twisted tale of love, loss, and deadly consequences. Laurie meets Chad. In 2018, Laurie became obsessed with Chad's books about near-death experiences and the apocalypse. She met Chad at a Preparing a People event in October of that year, and the two quickly developed a strong connection. Chad claimed that he and Laurie had lived past lives together on different planets. Chad believed he had lived 31 previous lives and Laurie had lived 21, with 5 of those lives overlapping with each other. He also prophesied that he and Laurie would be chosen to lead the 144,000 survivors of the end times. Laurie confided to her friend Melanie Gibb that she and Chad were meant to be together despite them both still being married to other people. When Gibb suggested that Chad and Laurie should divorce their spouses first, Laurie claimed they weren't allowed to because of information they got from the spirit world. Over time, a small group formed around Chad and Laurie's teachings, which they called the Church of the Firstborn. It included Laurie's brother Alex Cox and niece Melanie Boudreau. Chad and Laurie believed in ideas of light and dark spirits possessing people. The dark spirits turned people into zombies, and the only way to free them was through death. They even developed a scoring system to rate people's spiritual status. Deaths begin. In February 2019, Laurie's behavior became so alarming that Charles Vallow filed for divorce, citing fears for his life. Laurie apparently told Charles that her feelings for him and JJ had faded away and abruptly disappeared without a trace. For nearly 2 months, Laurie was nowhere to be found, but Charles claimed that she had threatened to kill him if he got in the way of her mission as a God-assigned leader of the 144,000. Charles later dropped the divorce filing, hoping to repair the marriage. But tragically, in July 2019, he was shot and killed by Laurie's brother, Alex Cox. Cox claimed he had shot Charles in self-defense during a dispute and no charges were filed. A few days after Charles passed away, Chad sent Laurie a love story through text messages, which investigators described as a romance novel. The story featured James and Elena, code names for Chad and Laurie, and included detailed descriptions of their sexual relationship. Laurie relocated to Rexburg, Idaho, with her kids in August 2019 to be closer to Chad. In the meantime, Chad had been telling people in his inner circle that his wife Tammy would die before her 50th birthday. Investigators later found they had discussed Tammy being possessed by a dark spirit named Viola that needed to be released. Indeed, on October 19th, Tammy was found deceased in her home, seemingly from natural causes. Chad claimed his wife had been ill and died in her sleep, but later investigations would find that this was not the case. At Tammy's funeral, Heather Daybell, Chad's sister-in-law, noticed something off about Chad's behavior. She said he didn't seem genuinely upset. Jason William added that Chad was trying to cry but wasn't shedding real tears. During the service, Chad shockingly spoke about Tammy's depression, called her lazy, and claimed she was hard to live with. Police reports later revealed that Chad received $430,000 in life insurance after Tammy's death, equivalent to about $512 in 2023. Chad declined an autopsy and her death was ruled as from unknown causes. Just 2 weeks after Tammy's death, Chad and Laurie married in Hawaii. In December 2019, Laurie's brother Alex Cox also died suddenly of what was deemed natural causes. His death came just a day after police told Laurie that Tammy's body was being exhumed for an autopsy. Alex had previously attacked Laurie's third husband Joseph Ryan in 2017 and was responsible for the death of fourth husband, Charles Vallow. Some speculate that Alex, with his low IQ and involvement in the cult, may have been an easily manipulated enforcer in the string of violence and deaths surrounding Lori and Chad before his own demise. JJ and Tylee go missing. In the midst of the curious deaths, Lori's children JJ and Tylee mysteriously vanished in September 2019, shortly after Lori moved to Idaho. Tylee was last seen on September 8th in Yellowstone National Park with her mom, brother, and uncle Alex. The last known footage of JJ was from a neighbor's doorbell camera on September 17th. He had an unexcused absence from school on the 23rd, and Lori told the school on the 24th that she would be homeschooling him. But JJ was never seen again after September 22nd. Lori continued collecting her children's Social Security survivor benefits after they went missing and seemed unconcerned about their whereabouts. When police conducted a welfare check on JJ in late November, Lori claimed he was with a friend in Arizona. Police discovered that this was a lie. Shooting of Brandon Boudreaux. Adding to the mystery, in October 2019, Lori's niece Melanie Boudreaux's husband Brandon was shot at in Arizona by someone driving a Jeep registered to the deceased Charles Vallow. Brandon had been fighting a bitter divorce from Melanie, who had gotten deeply involved in Lori's cult. Brandon believes the attempt on his life was connected to Lori's group and the children's disappearance. Lori and Chad flee. In late November 2019, Rexburg police went to Lori's home for a welfare check on JJ and discovered she had fled Idaho with Chad. Investigators then realized Tylee was also missing. A search of Lori's abandoned storage unit revealed the kids' bikes, photos, and clothes. Police officially announced JJ and Tylee as missing in December and said Lori and Chad were persons of interest and their disappearance was possibly linked to the suspicious death of Tammy Daybell. A massive search effort ensued as the FBI became involved in the complex multi-state case. Lori and Chad were discovered to be in Hawaii, living off the proceeds of Tammy's life insurance. They were served with a court order to produce the children, but failed to comply. Remarkably, the couple acted aloof and unconcerned in the face of questions about the kids. Remains found and arrests made. Authorities searched Chad Daybell's property in Salem, Idaho on June 9, 2020. In a shocking discovery, they unearthed the remains of Tylee and JJ in shallow graves in Chad's backyard pet cemetery. Tylee's body had been dismembered and burned, while JJ was found with tape on his mouth, arms, and wrists. Chad was arrested and charged with concealing evidence. Lori had already been arrested in February 2020 on charges of child abandonment and contempt of court. Both were later charged with murder and conspiracy related to the deaths of the children and Chad's previous wife Tammy. Lori was initially deemed incompetent to stand trial for a short period before being ruled able to face the charges. Trials and sentencing. Lori and Chad's trial was severed into two separate proceedings. Lori's trial began in April 2023, where the prosecution laid out the extensive evidence of her role in the murders of her children and Chad's wife as part of a doomsday cult scheme. Digital communications showed her claiming the children and Tammy had turned into zombies that needed to be released. An autopsy on Tammy's exhumed body also found that she had died of asphyxiation. On May 12, 2023, Lori was found guilty of all charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder in her kids' deaths, 3 counts of conspiracy related to the kids and Tammy, and grand theft for continuing to collect the dead children's benefits. On July 31, 2023, Lori was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She maintained her innocence, claiming Jesus told her no one was murdered. Chad's trial began in April 2024, with the prosecution painting him as the cult leader who used Lori as a pawn to remove obstacles to their relationship and religious delusions. On May 30, 2024, Chad was found guilty of all charges: 3 counts each of first-degree murder and conspiracy related to Tammy, Tylee, and JJ, plus grand theft and insurance fraud. On June 1st, he was sentenced to death for his role in masterminding the murders. Justice served, but wounds remain. The tragic case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell came to a close with their convictions and sentencing, but the heartbreak and pain it caused will linger on for the many lives they destroyed in pursuit of their doomsday delusions. The search for JJ and Tylee gripped the nation as people held out hope the children would be found alive. The devastating discovery of their remains was a blow that will forever haunt all who loved them. No punishment for Lori and Chad can bring back what was lost. In the end, this is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked extremism, the power of cults to destroy lives, and the ultimate evil of filicide, the murder of one's own children. The tragic story of Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell, and the innocent lives they destroyed will not soon be forgotten. May Tylee, JJ, Charles, Tammy, and all the victims somehow find peace as their killers face earthly and spiritual justice. Let this be a warning to all of how quickly one can descend from a path of light into unfathomable darkness. And may the memories of Tylee and JJ forever shine bright. In our next case, we uncover the ongoing tragedy of the Shakahola Cult Massacre. The tragic story of the Shakahola Cult Massacre begins in the Kilifi region of southeastern Kenya. In early 2023, hundreds of followers of the Good News International Church, led by the charismatic pastor Paul Mackenzie and Thanger, gathered in the remote Shakahola forest. Mackenzie had promised his devotees a path to salvation. By starving themselves to death, they would meet Jesus and avoid damnation in the impending apocalypse he prophesied. But instead of divine deliverance, the faithful found only suffering and death. By the time authorities intervened in April 2023, a shocking 400-plus bodies had been exhumed from mass graves, with hundreds more followers still missing. The Shakahola Cult Massacre would become one of the worst tragedies caused by religious extremism in modern times. This is the chilling story of how one man's toxic ideology led hundreds to their graves. The rise of Paul Mackenzie's cult. Paul Mackenzie and Thanger seemed an unlikely cult leader. The former taxi driver founded the Good News International Church in 2003 in the coastal town of Malindi. His passionate sermons and charismatic style quickly drew a devoted following among the region's poor and uneducated population. But Mackenzie's teachings grew increasingly radical over the years. He preached that education was evil and demanded followers remove their children from school. He denounced modern medicine and government institutions as satanic. More bizarrely, Mackenzie eventually claimed that he was a prophet who spoke directly to God. Among others, 39-year-old Titus Katana, an ex-follower of the Kenyan cult leader, broke away from Mackenzie's church following the introduction of some of these increasingly intrusive and corrupted laws. His creed even began attracting police attention. Mackenzie was arrested in 2017 on charges of radicalization, but was later acquitted. By 2019, he was arrested again for possessing film material intended to incite hatred against practitioners of other religions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam. Despite controversy surrounding his inflammatory rhetoric, his sermons continued to proliferate through his community and took on a more apocalyptic tone. With the church under more scrutiny from rights groups and authorities, an undeterred Mackenzie relocated with many of his followers to a plot of land he owned in the isolated Shakahola forest. There, far from prying eyes, Mackenzie's cult descended into full-blown religious extremism. He declared the Shakahola forest a holy land, and even dubbed it New Jerusalem. Adherents were told to cut all ties with the outside world, a world which Mackenzie deemed irredeemably corrupt. The settlement. Life in the Shakahola cult settlement was strictly regimented. The estimated 800 to 1,000 residents were separated into self-contained communities, with biblical names like Judea, Bethlehem, Galilee, Samaria, Capernaum, Emmaus, and Nazareth. Cult members were compelled to surrender all their possessions and subsist communally off the land. Modern clothing was prohibited in favor of simple robes. Communication with all outsiders, including family, was forbidden. Mackenzie himself lived in a large compound in Judea containing 3 houses and a gazebo, where he would hold meetings with church officials. Armed thugs helped Mackenzie exert control over his congregation, and his inner circle of trusted lieutenants enforced his increasingly draconian edicts. Mackenzie instructed his followers to destroy all documents given by the government, including national IDs and birth certificates. The combined threat of wild animals and men with guns kept people confined to their homes, and they would only gather twice a month under a tree in their village to be led in prayer by their designated preacher. Mackenzie's word was law, and any perceived disloyalty was harshly punished. Mackenzie's doomsday revelation. The true depths of Mackenzie's malevolent designs were yet to be revealed. In early 2023, the self-proclaimed prophet claimed to have received a revelation from God during a 40-day fast in the wilderness. Doomsday was fast approaching, Mackenzie preached, and the only path to salvation was through starvation. He ordered his followers to follow a fasting schedule, starting with the children, single people, married women, and then married men, to intake no food or water, with the promise of meeting Jesus in the afterlife. Mackenzie and his family would go last. Mackenzie assured the faithful that their suffering would not only save their own souls, but serve as an atonement for the world's sins in the end times. He invoked the biblical motif of sacrifice and twisted it to his own dark ends. Some cult members, so thoroughly indoctrinated and cut off from reality, willingly embraced Mackenzie's apocalyptic vision. Parents watched their own children waste away, forbidden from intervening lest they interfere with the divine plan. As the death toll mounted, Mackenzie's deputies buried the bodies in shallow graves scattered throughout the forest. But even in the throes of starvation, survival instincts kicked in, and some followers managed to break free from Mackenzie's psychological grip. In March 2023, a small group of emaciated women and children emerged from the forest, seeking food and medical attention in nearby villages. Their shocking condition and stories of mass starvation quickly reached the authorities. The horrific discovery. On April 14th, a multi-agency team, including police, medics, and aid workers, entered the Shakahola forest on a rescue mission. What they encountered was a scene of unimaginable horror. Scattered among the 9 settlements were mass graves, some with the bodies of children still clinging to their deceased mothers. Survivors were little more than living skeletons. Over the following weeks, the scale of the atrocity came into focus. Forensic teams painstakingly exhumed 427 bodies in total, a somber procession of victims. Men, women, and children who had starved to death or been strangled or bludgeoned by the cult enforcers. Over 600 people were still unaccounted for, likely buried in yet undiscovered graves. Aftermath and investigation. The horrific discovery of mass graves in the Shakahola forest sent shockwaves through Kenya and the international community. As authorities began to unravel the extent of the atrocities committed by Paul Mackenzie and the Good News International Church, the nation grappled with the difficult questions that arose in the wake of such a tragedy. Mackenzie and his associates were swiftly arrested, and the investigation into their activities began in earnest. The pastor, who had a history of radical preaching and run-ins with the law, now faced the most serious charges of his life. In December 2023, in a separate case, Mackenzie was sentenced to 18 months in prison by the Malindi court for illegally distributing films and operating a film studio without a valid license from the Kenya Film Classification Board. However, this conviction paled in comparison to the heinous crimes he was accused of in relation to the Shakahola cult massacre. As the investigation progressed, the extent of the psychological and physical abuse within the cult became increasingly clear. Mackenzie and dozens of his associates faced a litany of charges, including murder, terrorism, manslaughter, assault, radicalization, engaging in organized criminal activity, cruelty to a child, facilitating the commission of a terrorist act, and child torture. The evidence against them mounted, painting a picture of a cult leader who had wielded his influence to devastating effect. Despite the gravity of the accusations against him, Mackenzie remained defiant. He claimed that the starvation was God's will and that the authorities were persecuting him for his faith. This stance only served to underscore the depth of his delusion and the extent to which he had manipulated his followers. In January 2024, the case against Mackenzie and his associates reached a critical point. Mackenzie and 94 others were charged with terrorism-related crimes in connection with the deaths of 429 followers. The scale of the tragedy was almost incomprehensible, and the nation struggled to come to terms with how such a thing could have happened. By February 2024, the focus of the investigation had turned to the most vulnerable victims of the cult's activities: the children. Mackenzie and 29 others were charged with the murder of 191 children found buried in the forest. The revelation that so many young lives had been lost sent a wave of grief and anger through the nation. As the investigation continued and more details emerged about the inner workings of the cult, the Kenyan government and public were forced to confront difficult questions. How had Mackenzie, a man with a documented history of dangerous radicalization, been allowed to operate unchecked for so long? Why did hundreds of people follow him into the wilderness to their doom? Investigators pointed to the desperate socioeconomic conditions in the region as a key factor in the tragedy. Mackenzie had preyed on the poor and uneducated, promising them divine salvation from their earthly misery. His message of a corrupt, doomed world had found fertile ground among those with little hope, and the cult had provided a sense of purpose and community, even as it destroyed them. Others highlighted the lax regulation of Kenya's mushrooming religious movements as a contributing factor. The rise of predatory figures like Mackenzie had been enabled by a system that struggled to balance religious freedom with the need to curb extremism. The tragedy in Shakahola had brought this issue into sharp focus, and there were calls for greater oversight of religious institutions. Lessons and reflections. As a shocked nation mourned the senseless loss of life in Shakahola, the government vowed reforms. President William Ruto established a task force to review the rules governing religious institutions. Prosecutors built a wide-ranging case against Mackenzie and his accomplices, aiming to secure justice for the hundreds of lives stolen. But for the survivors and the families of the deceased, the scars run deep. Parents bury children whose last moments were filled with confusion and agony. Widows and orphans piece together shattered lives, their loved ones stolen by a cruel lie. A community tries to fathom how their neighbors descended into such darkness. The Shakahola forest, once a place of unspeakable suffering, has become a somber memorial. Rows of simple wooden crosses mark the graves of the cult's victims, a testament to the lives cut short by one man's twisted vision. Mourners leave flowers and keepsakes, grasping for some way to process the incomprehensible. As the wheels of justice turn and the nation reflects, the story of the Shakahola cult massacre stands as a chilling reminder of the insidious power of religious extremism and reverence of cult figures. How an ideology in the wrong hands can lead the vulnerable down a path of destruction, and how eternal vigilance is the price of preventing such tragedies. The scars of Shakahola will linger long in Kenya's memory. But in the end, the truth prevailed over Mackenzie's web of deadly lies. The brave survivors who sounded the alarm, the dedicated rescuers who faced the horror head-on, and the investigators who untangled the cult's secrets are the guardians of light against the darkness. As the victims are laid to rest and the perpetrators face judgment, Kenya is left to ponder the hard lessons of the Shakahola tragedy. How to balance faith and freedom, community and individuality, hope and discernment. They are questions with no easy answers, but ones that demand attention lest the mistakes of the past be repeated. For the lives lost to the Shakahola cult, there is no true justice to be had. They cannot be brought back from the grave. But in their memory, in the tears shed for them, and the reforms enacted in their name, there is a chance for meaning to grow from the depths of meaningless suffering. A chance to build a world where the light of truth outshines the false prophets. As Kenya mourns and rebuilds, these are the values that light the way forward. The values that ensure the victims of Shakahola will never be forgotten and their fate never repeated. This was Agent Magpie, and remember guys, be good. And if you can't be good, be careful.